Hi, this is Marlene, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found on miamighostchronicles.com. Go to marlenepardo.com for information on new book releases. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and can also be listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests on the show. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, you can visit Strange Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com or find us on Blogspot. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing? Good, I hope. I'm doing good. I know as everybody, I'm not going to complain anymore about that. You know, I'm still opening boxes and I'm not, even though I kind of am. But anyway, and I know a lot of you, I've gotten messages about, do I miss the farm? I do and I don't as far as the planting, but something I'm learning is that, as a matter of fact, that's what I was doing today. Over here, that's a little bit further up north into the state, this is the time to plant as far as a lot of if you're doing any vegetables or even the flowers, I would go to I went to a couple of nurseries around here and I saw people where it was like a mad dash for, especially the fruit trees and stuff. I was like, what's going on? So I was used to doing my thing whenever I wanted to because the weather down there was different. But now, so yeah, I've gotten away from the farming, but I have to really do a lot of hard work, and I've gotten a lot of different, some vegetables, some perennials, annuals, all that other stuff. So yeah, it's I like it though. But yeah, it's basically up here. There's more seasons than what I was used to, but you know, it's a part for the. Eventually, I want to see if I take a little video of, you know, what I've got out here, and because I've got these very, very old oak trees outside that I've heard different estimates from people that have come out here that they're between 300 to 400 years old. Let's see if they're beautiful. They're really, really nice. They're about 60 feet up, and talk about the setting for a horror story. But let me get on to one of the things that I wanted to talk about is a sponsor that I have for this show. Okay, and this is about a podcast. It's called Military True Crime Addict. Okay, and what it is it's if you're searching for a podcast about crime relating to actual life events of military personnel, veterans, family members, and those associated with the military in any way, then you've come to the right place. They welcome military true crime addicts, where where they explore a plethora of actual true crime stories that have not been reported on by news outlets or media. These stories, upon hearing, you will be astounded by either the history that should have been told and reported on long ago. So in some cases, I mean that to understand it might be current, but it also might be something that happened some time ago. There'll be detailed stories that touch on topics such as assault, harassment, sexual preference, abuse, power, murder, hazing, rape, and all stories that in some way relate to our military veterans and their extended families. There's also an abundance of episodes of serial killers with military backgrounds that you will not believe, and they provide a voice to the victims and hear their side of the story. And they hope to raise awareness of the heinous crimes and those most impacted. You do not need to know anything about military to enjoy this podcast. Our listeners can hear original true crime stories with the specifics of what occurred. They can be found on Facebook at Military True Crime Addict, or the website address is militarytruecrimeaddict.com. So I urge you that if you're into true crime and, of course, something that has a military slant to it or aspect, even something that you might not be aware of, go check them out. But let's get on to the good part. The good part is my guest, and this gentleman has been here before. And as a matter of, we were discussing time flies when you're having fun, and even when you're not. It's almost been 3 years since he was on the show, and this is Paul Eno. He is one of the first paranormal. This is for people who are not familiar with him, because he's very well known in the paranormal field. He's one of the first paranormal investigators of the early 1970s. And this began while he was studying for the priesthood. His early mentors included pioneers Dr. Louisa Rhine, Father John J. Nicholas. He was a technical advisor for the film The Exorcist, and legendary, though very controversial, first generation grandparents of ghost hunting, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Matter of fact, we spoke briefly before we started to roll that about the new documentary that's been running for a few months about Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now, Paul, he graduated from 2 seminaries, but was expelled from a third because of his paranormal work. And about a year to go before his ordination, he turned to journalism, ending up in a distinguished career as a newspaper and magazine reporter and editor. And today, he's an award-winning New England journalist and a former news editor at the Providence Journal, and the author and contributor to 10 books, 2 bestsellers, one in state history that is used in several Rhode Island school districts, and 2 books that are already considered classics of paranormal literature. He's also the co-author with his son Ben of 2 books, a contributor to 3 other books, and the author of numerous articles in Fate and other magazines. He holds a rare PhD degree in philosophy. On top of that, he served in the U.S. Coast Guard Reserve, where, among other things, he led an intelligence photographic team in the wake of the Operation Urgent Fury in the Caribbean Sea in 1983 and 84. He's appeared many times on Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell, may he rest in peace, George Noory and George Knapp, Midnight in the Desert with Heather Wade, and on George Noory's television show Beyond Belief. He has presented his interactive programs on the paranormal all over America and in Europe, and he's appeared on the Travel, Discovery, and History channels. He serves on the research committee of the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute, and in 2019, he received the Albert Nelson Marquis Lifetime Achievement Award for his appearance in Who's Who in America for 30 years. He and his wife of 39 years live in Rhode Island. So, drum roll, how are you doing today, Paul?
Well, pretty fair, Marlene. You got through the whole bio there. That's the first time that's been done, I think.
Of course, everything. Well, this is all about you, and I'm thrilled to have you back. And
it's nice to be back. Yeah.
So, after we spoke last, I know you've had other books come out, other things, and as I mentioned earlier, your part of the country, the Northeast, is very well known for having a lot of paranormal events. And so what's been happening, or what new books have you brought out?
Well, since I was last on, which I think was, as you say, 3 years ago or so, there's been one that, my son and I, Ben and I wrote one that came out from Schiffer Books in 2016. That's Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong. And then in 2019 was a book that just I wrote, and that's Dancing Past the Graveyard, Parasites, Poltergeists, Parallel Worlds, and God. Okay. So that is a book I hated writing. There'd been a lot of things in the past that I worked very hard to bury the memories of, exorcisms and things of that kind that were on early on in my, well, if you want to call it a career, and other cases that I'd written about before that I expanded upon somewhat. And so that's what that pretty much was about. What's been going on is that we, as you probably know, have specialized since really 2005 in what we refer to as flap areas. Now, we've had to invent an entirely new vocabulary just to talk about this stuff because there were no words to describe the concepts, at least as far as we could find, adequately enough to write about them or talk about them. So The flap area, the term flap has been applied to UFO cases, but a flap area in our definition is a very wide area. We're working on one that's about 330 square miles at this point, from Connecticut into New York State, that involves almost incessant paranormal activity of different kinds that are not classically associated with one another. So you've got UFO phenomena, all kinds of ghostly stuff going on. You've got cryptids, Bigfoot, things of this kind, and things that don't even have names yet, that are all taking place in these areas. There was a photograph that we got of a creature that I've never even heard of the like of before, standing over somebody's sink. It was taken by a security camera while they weren't home, because the area, what we refer to as the Litchfield Triangle in Connecticut, there, which has, you name it, it's going on, including the military presence, because they'd love to find out about this too. And you had break-ins taking place in which nothing was stolen. The police were scratching their heads, couldn't figure out what was going on. And this security camera got a picture of this creature leaning over this sink, and that's reproduced in Dancing Past the Graveyard. So this is what we've been doing, and it's never a dull moment.
When you say a creature, are we talking cryptid or extraterrestrial type, or what was it? What did it look like?
Well, I don't know, Marlene. We tend to put labels on things.
I know.
I'm oh no, we all do it, and so. But as far as I don't know, ultra terrestrial. The whole point of flap areas, if our theories are correct, is you've got. Well, first of all, what did Einstein say in his special theory of relativity? Among other things, it was the time. Essentially is all simultaneous. There really is no past. There really is no future, which does wonders for things like reincarnation and even death itself. I mean, how can you have any of that if there's no past and no future, really?
Yeah, it's all happening at the same time, right?
Yeah, we just experience it that way. And more physicists have come out and said that. So that's kind of the basis of the understanding of the flap area. And you have intersect points, as we call them, overwashes, another word we had to invent, of the energies of these parallel worlds in which everything that is possible is actually real. All right, not all coming together at once, although that could be happening at this point. And theologians have talked about that. And so I think what we're dealing with is anything can happen in a flap area, because you've got interplay of different, what to us would be different times, different inhabitants, all sorts of things. And one of the reasons I hated writing the book, Dancing Past the Graveyard, was because I sort of came clean on things that I advise people not to do. I always tell people, don't do the medium thing. It's dangerous. You don't know what you're touching. It could be anything saying it and people believe it. It's too dangerous. But a lot of the cases in the book that I finally broke down and wrote about, it looks like I'm doing exactly that. Okay. So not wanting to appear to be a hypocrite, I try to explain I think it's more of a meditation thing, and talking to neighbors in close parallel worlds. And many of these parallel worlds, a physicist will tell you, who believes this, that the laws of physics are very different, or can be very different from world to world. So I've encountered cases where there was a fellow named Gilbert. And if we have time, I can give you some background on that. I was in the seminary, a Wadhams Hall Seminary in upstate New York, which doesn't sound like a Catholic seminary, but it was. And my boss, Bishop John Marshall of the Diocese of Burlington, Vermont, knew I was involved in this stuff, and I think he wanted to keep me out of mischief. So he sent me up there to the place in the middle of nowhere, right on the St. Lawrence River, right on the Canadian border. It was nothing. We call it the tundra. It was nothing, right? However, he did not figure on the presence of Father Lawrence. That's only his first name. I give the name in the book, who was the not only the Catholic chaplain at the St. Lawrence State Hospital just up the road, but he was the diocesan exorcist for the Diocese of Ogdensburg. Very, very hush-hush. And he knew I'd been working with that Lorraine Warren. So I would see him walking down. Now, he lived at the seminary, but he didn't teach. So I said, who is this guy? And a very quiet, kind of a buzzy, funny voice and everything else, but wonderful, wonderful spiritual fellow. And he called me to his room one day. And he said, I hear you've been working with Ed and Lorraine Warren. And he liked Ed and Lorraine. Now, the previous faculty and the faculty I had after this, different academic levels of seminary,
Mm-hmm.
did not like Ed and Lorraine Warren. But this faculty was very supportive of me. I was very surprised. They're around 20 and 21 years old,
Okay.
And so push comes to shove, I ended up assisting him at the state hospital where a lot of weird things were going on.
I bet.
Yeah, I mean, when the doctors would be in a room, somebody was diagnosed schizophrenic or some psychosis or something, and stuff starts flying off shelves at the other end of the room. Obviously, this is not,
All right. Yeah. Right. This is not some family that's
yeah.
doing this for publicity. Yeah.
Yeah. So something else is going on. That's when they call in Father Lawrence. So I was involved in a couple of exorcisms. One of which was particularly traumatic. And if you want to get into that later, we can. But
yeah. Yes. Most certainly.
But the background, of course, it was that that's what was happening. So I would go to the state hospital as a seminary student, and several of us would go. There was a group that would go, and it was part of our pastoral training was to, visit with Catholic patients at the hospital. Father Lawrence would say mass, and they would, that kind of thing. And there was one woman who was in there who said she was a psychic medium. Okay. And I said, well, Catholics really aren't supposed to do that. And, she said, oh, it's fine. You couldn't argue with her. And she was in a hallway that was considered to be very strange in this particular ward. Okay. And she would, the staff didn't like to be there at night. The patients get rowdy and stuff. And most of them were, old as dirt, still getting rowdy. And I said to this lady, she said to me, I can tell you what's going on in this hallway. And I said, all right, what? And she said, well, there's a man waiting for his wife, and he's going to take her home. So, standard garden variety seance, 19th century stuff. You assume that it's a dead guy, in the ward waiting for his wife to die. He's going to take her home to the light or heaven or nirvana or wherever, right? Right. So fine, so I said, okay, that's the garden variety standard explanation. But I said, I want to find out about this. I'm going to try something. So we were generally there once a week, but I all of a sudden started to show up a couple of days in a row. And I said, well, there are exams going on at the seminary, and panic is set in. I want a quiet place to study. So they bought that, the nurses. So there was a little room in this hallway. It was supposed to be a chapel. It was undeveloped, so to speak. There were a couple of chairs, a table, there was a cross, and then not much else. A light bulb. So I went in there, and I went into a meditative state. I learned meditation from, of all people, the Trappist monks in Spencer, Massachusetts. And little did they know what it would lead to. But I was in this state, and all of a sudden, I heard right in my ear, hello, not hello, hello. I said, all right, So I was kind of shocked. And there ensued for the better part of 3 evenings, fading in and out, a conversation with a fellow named Gilbert. Okay. And at first, apparently in what to me would be a parallel world in which it was not considered crazy to talk to the neighbors, he said. Emphasis on the last syllable, right? Because that's the way that's the way he talked. Okay. Some of his vocabulary I couldn't make out, but it was obviously English. And I had never heard of anything like this. I'd never experienced anything like it. And he was waiting for his wife. And I said, oh, gee, could this lady be right? He was waiting for his wife at the Canadian National Railway Station across the Bloody River in Prescott, Ontario. Now, I'd been there 100 times, taking the train back and forth to Montreal, because that's how you get to Montreal, 120 miles. And but it was not in our reality. It was an entirely different reality. And it was quite clear what he was saying. But again, he would kind of fade in and out. And I said, I'm across the river, like a mile away in Ogdensburg, New York. I mean, what the hey is going on? And he didn't think anything strange about that at all. And as I say, it took the better part of 3 days to kind of get through this conversation. And apparently, what I gathered, in his corner of the multiverse, it wasn't considered strange, as I say, to talk to the neighbors who were simply people in different parallel worlds close by, and there was energy exchange and a communication, and that wasn't considered weird. Now, in our world, now you got to picture that. Here I am at the heart of a psychiatric hospital, talking to myself in this room. Now, the last thing I needed was for the staff
It's like,
to
yeah,
hear me. I would have ended up a patient.
get a room ready for them.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it was rather comical, the setup, but it was. I didn't know what to do with this information. I went back to the seminary, and I like didn't come out of my room except to take exams for like 2 or 3 days. Finally, the faculty sent somebody to see if I was all right. And I wasn't going to blurt out what this was, but I was extremely upset. Marlene, there's nothing more terrifying than something that happens to you, paranormal or otherwise, that smashes your belief system.
Oh, you better believe it.
Now, things in the I see what you did there. Yeah, but as far as the actual events, they can be scary enough. But all we really have is our belief system.
Well, and that's the thing. It's almost like, doesn't matter. You don't have, how people are trying to find proof to convince other people. But once it happens to you alone, that's it. Like you said, there's something that shifts in there. It's like, I don't care if nobody ever believes me, but God, I know that this is real.
Yeah.
Or true.
That's why I never wrote about this. I think, I would say we believe what we believe. Our theories and methods about, the multiverse and all were developed from personal experience in the trenches. Well, this was really one of the first major paranormal experiences that I had that started to be thinking about those theories and methods.
Let me ask something, Paul, and something, and this is a little bit segue. I'm surprised. Why weren't you ever tapped to become an exorcist when you were in the seminary?
Well, one of the, I think Father Lawrence maybe had that in mind as I went, but again, I was still very young. I was at the beginning of what was called at the time major seminary. It was really the last 2 years of college, and you had to major in philosophy, and then you'd go on to 4 years of graduate theology, and then you'd be ordained, presumably. However, the little glitch in my world at the time was that I started to develop a relationship with the Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Okay. Now, people think they're just Roman Catholics without the Pope, but that's not entirely true. They're older, historically, and I thought they had a more original approach to Christianity. More out of the early centuries rather than the Renaissance or the Reformation or anything else. And I still think that's true, but I actually, and this never, seminarians in the Roman Catholic Seminary did not leave the church. They left the seminary, but not the church, right?
Right.
And I became Orthodox in my senior year there, and they were very gracious about it. They let me graduate. I got my degree, and then I went on to the next academic level, which was the same as the Roman seminary. It was St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary in New York City. Very, very different in many ways. First of all, and this really wasn't on my radar when I did this. People thought it was, which is they thought I wanted to be a married priest. Orthodox parish priests are almost all married. It's considered odd not to be.
Okay.
So, I mean, that solves a lot of problems because it creates others. But in their seminary, their faculty, they were married. There were women students. It was so much healthier, I thought.
Right.
And but in any case, they did not like my paranormal work, and they did not like Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Oh, it was like, because I was thinking, wow, to me, it would be like his interest in the paranormal is like, that's a big red neon arrow. This is Exorcist material,
Yeah, maybe if I'd stayed in the Latin church, but the Orthodox, again, you're a new convert, keep your nose in your books, and out of the Warren's business, So that was an entirely different thing. And they're the ones that threw me the heck out in 1977, right?
Really?
As a matter of fact, it was funny. The rector, who was a distinguished theologian, whom I love to this day because he's translated, as we say, some years ago, but he was one of my teachers, Father Alexander Schweman, called me into his office afterward, and he said, essentially, he'd come back from Paris that night. He went to the faculty meeting, and somebody claimed that I performed an exorcism on somebody in the student body, which was complete nonsense. I would never do that. And he said, "You want to come back and study?" Right. I said, "Yes, Father, I do." But I never heard back from them. I mean, what is
weird.
that? So I don't know.
That's very weird.
It's got to be, maybe they and I both had a lucky escape. And so I kind of picked myself up, dusted myself off, and decided to get into journalism.
Okay.
So I went to Trinity College in Hartford and studied in the Master of Liberal Arts program, and they ended up shoehorning my way into the only newspaper in New England that would talk to me. And that was one in Rhode Island. Here's how I got to Rhode Island. And I later found out that it was considered the worst daily newspaper in New England. It had a revolving door that would leave your head spinning. So, but it was a great start. I did all kinds of exciting stuff as a reporter, and I ended up later on at the Providence Journal, which was the major metro here, as an editor. And because that sounds more important than it is, because there are a lot of editors. But and then finally, I ended up starting my own media company. And when I wanted to work at home, so they didn't have to go to daycare. My wife is in the law business, and had to go to her office. And so the boys both worked for me at some point. Ben kind of still does with the radio show and stuff. And so it was really, it really worked out in the end. But I didn't become a priest, and I've never done an exorcism.
I would have thought, because, I had heard a little bit ago, a couple of years, I want to say, after Father Amroff and passed away in 2016, the official exorcist with the Catholic, that they were having a little bit of a problem, not with new priests, but with new priests wanting to become exorcists. That a lot of them were like, no, we don't want to do that.
Yeah, there were a lot of funny stories coming out of the Vatican at the time. Now, I had two friends at the Vatican, one of whom worked in the secret archives. It really actually is such a thing, right? But I mean, like, they're going to tell me what's going on, because I was already on the air. So, but what I've heard from friends and contacts is that they had, like, apparently one public conference about exorcism and exorcists, and they were doing what I had advised them. Like I said, like, they're going to listen to me. I was a kid. I said, you see, the Exorcist movie had just come out at the end of '73.
Right.
And that's when I was working on all this stuff. And finally, 74 was wild. And that ended up at the Bridgeport Poltergeist that November. And everybody was all excited about exorcism. And I said, why don't you just tell people, here's what it is. Don't worry about it. We're on top of it, and go on with your life, But no, they clammed up. And what's the best way to get people nosy about something and digging is clamming up.
Oh, sure.
When you're supposed to know, So, I mean, it was terrible. But again, as I said, like, they weren't going to listen to me. So maybe they finally realized, 100 years later, more recently, that they don't really serve themselves well by clamming up, and maybe they should talk more about it openly.
Yeah, of course.
But again, it's a crazy subject. People don't understand it, and they go wild with it. And they see Hollywood movies and take that.
I was going to say, thank you, Exorcist. I think it really started with that movie came out in the 70s. That was That was
there was a lot of interest in late 60s too, which is why they made the movie. Now, Father John Nicola, who was one of my mentors, as I say, was probably the leading exorcist in the country at the time of the Roman Catholic variety. And he had the anonymous job of assistant director of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C. Now, you watch news reports from Washington, they have this background. You have the Capitol, but up in the upper left-hand corner in the northeast part of the city is this huge dome and a big spire. That's the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. And so it's obviously still there. And he was the assistant director, which was the most anonymous job in the Catholic Church. I mean, what does the assistant director do? And he took care of exorcisms, and he kind of managed that whole scene for the U.S. Church. Now, I met him through my brother, who was a priest across the street teaching at the seminary that was part of Catholic University. So he got us together. I don't know if he ever regretted that, but so I whenever I'd visit my brother, which was a lot, I'd be closeted with Father John Nicola, and he'd give me guidance and guide some reading for me and all this stuff, and give me advice. And he was really wonderful. Now, he was the technical advisor for the film The Exorcist.
Okay.
Which he said he regretted doing. And he said a lot of the things that supposedly happened on the set, the weird stuff, that was largely true.
Okay.
So, and a lot of weird things happened to the cast after that too. So this stuff is pretty pervasive. But again, when I was involved in the exorcisms with Father Lawrence, this is particularly the one in the end of '73, I was I've always been a very persistent and annoying questioner, particularly in the seminary. I would say stuff like, okay, well, the Bible says Christ was in the tomb for 7 days, 3 days after the crucifixion. But I said, evening Friday to Sunday morning dawn is not 3 days. It's like a day and a half. And they'd say, well, the point is that he did it. Yeah, I agree with that. But I mean, get it right. Or I would say stuff like the theology says Christ was truly God and truly man. Well, he was truly man. He would have had a wife and reproduced. You'd think, and they don't like that. They said, of course not. What do you mean, of course not? And to this day, they're obsessed with the cervix, and the whole thing. The whole premise of Dan Brown's books, the horror that Christ could have had a child in a line of descent. And so what?
Exactly.
I did, and having been subjected, in the Eastern Christian mind, that doesn't bother them like that. It's the Catholics and Protestants who just go to breakfast.
Well, it's almost like that movie, they want Jesus dies, goes into heaven, Mary's the virgin, and the credits roll, and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm
never like he's less holy if he would have lived or lived an ordinary life.
Yeah, I don't get it. So, and I studied all this stuff for years. But anyway, so whether they're being more forthright about exorcism, I can see that there is a lot of parasite activity.
Because let's get back to that parasite, and I'm gonna explain, because for everybody, before we started rolling, I was asking Paul about that investigation that you mentioned that you were involved in when you were a young seminarian, which was the Bridgeport. And I asked you what became of the family afterwards and the little girl. And we got into the conversation about parasites, because sometimes there is that is some type of causation when you have let's say poltergeist activity, which is what they were calling it, right? In the Bridgeport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or something that persists. And you mentioned that family, that it wasn't per se the house, it was them. Because they went to different places.
I think it's safe to say, as my friend Shane Searway does, that it's people who are haunted, not places.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I think that there are caveats to that. I mean, obviously, but in the case of the Bridgeport thing, and poltergeists are generally thought to be thought forms or the result of the energy produced by an agent, is the traditional term.
Right, like a PK, whatever.
Yeah, RSPK and all that. Recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. The little girl, Marcy, presumably being the agent, because she was 10, she was about to enter puberty and all this stuff. But it's been a long time since I believed any of that. All right. Now, particularly in these exorcism cases, early on, I'd only been doing this for a few years. It just got the impression that we were, as the old cliche goes, being played like bass fiddles by this thing. The ritual of exorcism used at the Roman Catholic Church is very institutionalized. It's very formal, and within the ritual are 3 actual exorcisms. Okay, and a lot of times, if something's going to happen, and it doesn't often. That's when it takes place. There are also places where the demon is ordered to give its name.
Right.
And that sort of thing. So it's all very formal. But I got the impression that this thing, whose name it said was Chow, that this voice came out of this little girl, it was not hers, was, as I say, playing us and feeding on the energy we were producing. Now, Father Lawrence was very calm all the time, highly spiritual man. There were the people involved were 2 attendants. I was one of the attendants, so I wasn't any major guy. Somebody who worked at the hospital staff was another attendant. There were 2 nurses and a doctor, always. And they were devout Roman Catholics, maybe because they'd seen this stuff before. I don't know, but they had to go to mass, go to confession, go to communion, fast. Actually, a very serious preparation for this. And there was a calmness about them in this, but I still think that the emotions produced by this thing, they were feeding upon it. And it was. I think there was only one parasite in this case, and I just think that because very obviously it wouldn't work, they'd have to go back, even if it was a year or 2 later. Barbara, the young 17-year-old girl who was the subject of this particular exorcism, died a few years later of a drug overdose. She was really messed up as it is, which is why she was a patient at the hospital, inpatient. So I just said that there's more to this than is generally believed. Okay.
Okay.
And I swear I've run into the same entities more than once in these situations. Even before this, my first ghost case in Connecticut, 1970 to 1972, I just got the impression that these people weren't dead at all, never mind being in purgatory, which was my original
Right. Right.
theological approach to what I thought they were. They were living lives in a parallel world. You could
Okay.
hear fire implements banging together. You could hear dogs, animals, people talking like it was a normal day, only you couldn't see them. So, I
Right.
mean, in my opinion, I said something is wrong with these old ideas are not good enough. So the same thing with parasites. And then finally getting in November of 74 in this house, there were things going on I'd only heard about, only read about. And it's considered one of the or one of the best documented poltergeist cases in history, because all kinds of police officers and journalists and trained people saw this stuff. I myself was hit in the leg by a flying television set and had a nice gash to show for it. I stood there while with police officers and firefighters, and a refrigerator floated off the floor.
Wow.
The police reports were, I believe they've been hushed up since then, but I reproduced several. Ed Warren got a hold of them. This is with Ed and Lorraine Warren in this case. And this is the first case dealt with in the first of the shock docs, as they call them on the Travel Channel, which was the true story of Ed and Lorraine Warren. And the first case covered was this one, and I explained what happened to me because I'm one of the few witnesses who's not dead.
Let me ask you something. Was there a triggering event that caused all these things to happen in that household, or what happened?
Well, one of the nobody really knows, but the little girl Marcy. This was a couple in their 40s who had a little boy who had translated, as we say, had died in the late 60s. Everybody goes, aha! Obviously, it's the jealous spirit of the baloney.
Right.
The little girl was adopted from the Iroquois Nation in Ontario, Canada, several years before this. A lovely little girl. But she was very deep. There was a lot of I suppose people might say in the traditional terms, she might have been an old soul.
Okay.
And it's often considered that she brought something with her. Okay. Now, as I say, I've known families that have had parasites of certain kinds. I call them the farmers, have farmed, for lack of a better term, families for generations.
Okay.
Run into that on a number of occasions. And this could have been one of those. It's not that there's anything wrong with Native American religion.
Right. No, we're talking in general, families that regardless
in general, just
races
human,
or
it's
whatever,
a human problem. Yeah. So she arrived in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and supposedly things would happen. At one point, she was supposedly, this is before the whole case broke, that they went in and the couch was lifting up the side she was sitting on, and her friend, the little girl sitting at the other end, was very shocked, to say the least. But when this all started to come down, it started, as these parasite cases do, very slowly. Some pounding, a few noises here and there. And as you get more annoyed, more fearful, or more angry, it feeds on it and gets stronger. All right.
Right.
Now, in my opinion, when I walked into this house, I felt 4 entities. Now, remember, I was still in the seminary. I was trained that these were demons. That's the way the Warrens and I approached it. And Father Bill Charbonneau, who was the priest that they brought in on this too. And as I mentioned off the air, the most difficult times are when your belief system is smashed. Because, well, what do we have but our belief systems? And my belief system was that these were demons. And we all believed that an exorcism had to be performed in the house. And we were waiting for the Bishop of Bridgeport, because these people were Catholics, to give permission for that. And that never happened.
Okay.
They were saying they were trying to fend off the press too. The bishop was. So here we are in the midst of this. It was chaos. Reporters and all people. So early on, people were just wandering in the house and looking around. And this went out far and wide, hither and yon, in the press. And so we had huge numbers of people outside the house, which I think only fed it more.
Right. And also, you mentioned The Exorcist had come out back then very recently. So,
people in the crowd were interviewed, actually said they expected Father Charbonneau or me to come flying out the window like the priest did at the end of the movie. So
Except no, there was no
fortunately,
long stairs to fall down.
all I had was the TV set was after me. That's about all that happened with
Yeah.
that. But there were all sorts of things going on, furniture flipping over, things of this kind. One of the strange, and this is what our show on Sunday, we're going to have John Fraser, the poltergeist expert from the UK, is going to be on with us on our show. And I want to get into with him some things that have not happened to me during poltergeist cases. Now, the closest I got to the auditory phenomena, where poltergeist supposedly will talk and this sort of thing, as in the Blair Witch case of 1817, 1821 in Tennessee. The closest I've gotten to that was Sam the talking cat in this Bridgeport case. Okay. Now, as these,
I never heard. What was that? Are you serious?
Oh, Sam the talking cat, supposedly, right now.
Okay.
I mean, I wasn't born yesterday, and I mean, I'm talking Mr. Ed here, but the little girl had a cat named Sam.
Okay.
And her psychological profile was very interesting. She was a classic poltergeist victim or parasite victim, in my opinion, because she'd been smothered by her parents, psychologically speaking. She'd been what we today would call bullied at school. So she'd been at home in that house for 6 weeks. Tiny house, really 3 rooms and a basement.
Okay.
And she had been very close to this cat. And she told me the cat was her only friend.
Okay.
And supposedly the cat would talk. And I could see she was holding it close to her throat and throwing her voice. In my opinion, that was what it was.
Right. Okay. So
But
she's
Mr. Gooden, yeah, well, but there was more to it. Supposedly, Mr. Gooden, Jerry, said that cat would come to the top of the stairs. First, the cat was fine before he went for an operation at the vet. I don't know what the operation was. He must have swallowed a mynah bird, Mr. Gooden said, quote unquote. He would come to the top of the stairs, the cat, not Mr. Gooden, supposedly pound on the door and demand to be let out and say, "Let me out of here, you dirty rat, you dirty Frenchman."
What?
That's what he said the cat would say. And he let the cat out and everything was all was forgiven. I mean, what? And somehow
And
the
you kept a
network
straight face when he told you that story. I mean, I'm sorry.
Yes, yeah, very serious, salt of the earth kind of guy, working class fellow, had never seen anything like this before, obviously. And he and his wife at the whole time were asking, why us?
Well, let me ask you, and this is very interesting. In other words, this family, this couple, obviously their child had died, but they had never had this type of experience. It was everything happened after they had a
yeah. Well, yeah. Again, they had been going on for a good 6 months, with the pounding and all, and they'd recorded this, and I heard recordings of the pounding before I got there. And there were police who were consulted, and seismologists who'd been consulted. City engineers came, and the best they could come up with was that there was a hospital down the road that was having an addition put on. Maybe they were banging around to the point where, but I mean, that's obviously didn't do it. There were supposedly footsteps heard as well, a window smashed from the inside, all sorts of stuff like this in the buildup to the weekend of November 23rd, 24th, 25th, and 26th of 1974. So, but the cat, I like the cat, but I never had seen anything like it. And in all of my years as a journalist, I'd never seen anything like this. At the time, there were 3 networks: there were ABC, NBC, and CBS. That was it. No cable or anything like that. They were close to New York, so the network sent reporters up. And here are these reporters holding a microphone up to the cat, begging it to say something.
They did do that.
From network television, right? And I guess fortunately for the cat, it kept his mouth shut, but because it would have been on Ed Sullivan like the following.
Or they decided to dissect me or something like that.
Yeah, right. So I mean, I don't know what to make of that, but I did hear a story from the daughter of a witness. The witness had been a firefighter, and I'd never heard this before. I only heard this a few months ago. I was on the air with somebody, and somebody called. I was on Coast to Coast, as a matter of fact, and they called in.
Okay.
And said, "Had you ever heard the story of the cat and my father?" I said, "No." And supposedly he was leaving the house, and the cat followed him and said to the effect of, "Get out of here! You're never going to find anything anyway." And excuse me. And I mean, that was the first I'd heard of that. I mean, these cases, you're
Let
sometimes
me tell
hearing
you
things you never
something.
heard
A
before.
talking cat would have been scarier, I think, than anything else. I'm sure that man never went back.
Yeah,
It must have been
Sam the
what?
talking cat.
Sammy
I
the
don't know. But
that's
supposedly, even being poltergeist cases, there are like Jeff the talking mongoose from what was it, about 1930 in the UK. And we did a whole show on this with the guy written a book about it. And the mongoose supposedly would talk. They would hardly ever see it, but disembodied voices in poltergeist cases tend to be rather common.
okay.
Again, as in the Blair Witch case too. So this is all interesting stuff. But the closest I came to that was Sam the talking cat.
You know what? I had no idea that was part of that case. That's
Well,
incredible.
many layers in that case. Yeah.
And getting back to that sometimes you found we discussed that that case and others that sometimes there's a something that when if you especially if you can speak to somebody in the family, it's like a generational thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. I mentioned the example. I was giving a talk in San Diego one time, and there was a decent audience, but my eyes kept being drawn to this one woman in the back, and because there was something attached to her, there was some kind of energy there. And so at the end of the lecture, she came up and said, "You noticed, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah, what's going on?" And she was from a family of Italian descent. Sometimes there are ethnic twists to this, like the Irish with the leprechaun. I mean, that apparently really happens. That's I don't know why, but it's interesting. But she said her family had been in California for several generations, and that she, her mother, her grandmother, and her great grandmother had all been psychics and mediums, and had attachments of some kind that were really a pain in the neck, for each generation.
Okay.
And we worked with her a little bit, and I think it probably got better. But I think she was dealing with one of the farmers, which is one of the species of parasites that we pinned a label on there. So, but I think this is relatively common of that kind of species, and I think that it's possible that in the Bridgeport case that might very well have been the situation too, because as I mentioned off the air, Marcy had a very sad life after that. After they threw us the heck out of the case because we had left simply because we needed to get some sleep.
Right.
And the police chief, Superintendent Walsh, sent officers into the house. This is on Tuesday, the 26th of November, and simply declared that the whole thing was a hoax. The traffic in the city was unbelievable. Everybody, this is all every which where in the media, and people. The traffic was both ends of the street. All the blocks around, bumper to bumper, because people wanted to see the ghost house, the haunted house. Of course. Yeah, and so they put the clamps on that, and then Marcy was and the family went to the Fairfield. We were told anyway that Warren found out, went to the Fairfield Hills psychological state hospital, the psychiatric department there, and things started to happen there. Supposedly, the Christmas tree had to be sunk in concrete that year because it kept moving. And then before they sold the house, which they actually managed to do, a team from Duke University parapsychology lab, as it was at the time, came in with a couple of the people I knew, who told me later that they just, something was weird, but that they couldn't. Nothing happened while they were there, and they couldn't get enough of a picture out of the witnesses to really put anything together, and that they didn't even write an in-house report on it. That's what Jerry Solfin told me. So again, fast forward 40 years, and you have William J. Hall, who decided that he was a kid at the time and remembers the crowds, wrote a book on this case and did a pretty good job. And he interviewed me and the only remaining witnesses, a bunch of 80-year-old retired police officers who were the only ones that were still around. And he got a pretty good book out of it. So that was the story of that. But as far as Marcy was concerned, she lived a rather solitary life, moved back to Ontario, Canada. Bill was able to find some of her relatives, and she died of cancer in 2012 or 2013, just before he was able to interview her. And still very sad. So she wasn't in the book either. But so I'm just about the only one left.
Right, and that's I've heard of similar things in other hauntings, or I want to say hauntings for lack of a better word, where when you start talking to them, you find out exactly what you described, that family members far back, mother, grandmother, grandparents, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, the family curse. Oh, well, they kind of like are
Yeah,
resigned.
precisely. I've actually heard it referred to as that. And one of the first things we do is go in with a questionnaire that's very detailed. And I tell people, there's a lot of personal stuff on here, including medical histories. And you want to find out, excuse me, if there's, drugs involved, if they've been involved in that, or what's
Sure.
going on in the family, because the family dynamics have a lot to do with the ringing the dinner bell, as it were, for these
Yeah.
parasites. And the family dynamics could go back for generations, as we've said. So, but every case is different, and we have a questionnaire online if people want to take a look at it. But that's mainly toward cryptid sightings. But so we're adapting that to be an online resource for people to report.
You mentioned something really interesting when you said those flaps, or areas.
Flap area, yeah.
When you say flap, are we talking overlapping or rips or portals between dimensions? Like, in other words, purposely, or just things that shift and come and go?
Well, that's one way to put it. I think that our ancestors knew all about this. Shamans from indigenous peoples have told me that, yeah, you're on the right track. This is just what we do, and that we're aware of this. When I was in England, for example, in 1989, I was supposed to be tracking down the Beast of Exmoor. It's supposedly a cryptid. But
Right.
I said, I'm over here. I'm going to make the most of it. And I went to visit some stone circles.
Okay.
Because I'm friendly with Paul Devereux, who was from the Dragon Project, who would measure energies in these stone circles, in particularly the UK and France. And I went to one that was still active, because sometimes I think the intersect points and the overwashes move, so the circle isn't active anymore. But in this one, the Score Hill Stone Circle in the county of Devon, it was a miserable March drizzly day, and I'm standing in this circle, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere. You have to go through this farm to get to what is out on the moors, as they call. I looked up, and coming from there are beautiful piles of rocks on the moors, and in this part of Devon they call them tors, Tor.
Yes.
Like this pile. And Sherlock Holmes wrote about them in The Hound of the Baskervilles. That was set near here. So I'm looking up at this tor, quarter mile away, maybe, if that. And a line of people comes out from behind it. Some on horseback, some walking. And I really couldn't tell whether. I said, "What the hey are they?" It was a Wednesday in March, and a kind of a grim day. So what are they doing? It could have been a group of people just adventuring or something. Some on horseback. But supposedly I was talking to the farmer, and he said the stones will come and go in that circle. Sometimes they'll appear, sometimes there'll be fewer stones the next day, and the people just sort of don't think anything of it at this point. So I'm wondering, here we may have the idea of an intersect point. Now, go back to the 60s, and probably one of the certainly the classic examples of this would be the Mothman case in the Ohio Valley of the U.S. John Keel, whom unfortunately died before I got to know him, was talking about window areas. That's what we're talking about. All sorts of things coming and going, intersect points, whatever you want to call it. And people, and we've talked to a lot of witnesses down there who were kids at the time, footsteps on their roofs, something landing and running around and taking off, red eyes looking in their windows and from under their furniture, increased psychic powers. Some people having very positive things happen when they encountered Mothman, that whatever this creature was. One guy I'm thinking of was saying that he all of a sudden he became brilliant in math in school, got all A's, where he'd been a flop before, and was able to paint as in paintings. And other people had these horrific experiences. So all these examples of flap areas, UFOs, all kinds of things, men in black, all kinds of things going on in the same area in relatively close proximity. And people usually don't associate Bigfoot with UFOs or ghosts or anything,
Exactly.
but we think they are intimately related because they're using the same processes to come and go. If it raises the question: are UFOs from other planets? Are they time travelers? In the sense of this simultaneous time moving from one consciousness stream to the other. Are they neither? Are they something we can't conceive of yet? Are they all of the above? These are all things I think we have to consider. So that's what flap areas are all about. And the one we started we've been working on one for almost 16 years now. And it was
Okay.
one of Ben's first cases. And this is in the Litchfield County area of Connecticut. And that's extended out to about 330 square miles at this point. Now, one of the things I asked Bill Bill Hall, when he was researching the Bridgeport book, says, see if you can, and this is something that didn't occur to us at the time, see if you can talk to people who were neighbors at the house at the time and see if anything happened in their houses. Sure enough, he found that there were things happening in their houses. And Ed Warren had a term, as sort of a spillover phenomenon, but I don't think he really got it as far as, nobody did, as far as multiverse ideas were concerned. There was a spike in UFO sightings over that area at the time. So all this kind of gets into why, and why is the flap area what it is and where it is. We have kind of been researching a phenomenon known as the Bouguer anomaly. All right, the Bouguer anomaly, named after a French scientist, is a gravitational anomaly. It's well known to science. As a matter of fact, they look for it when they're looking for oil and gas deposits. Engineers and seismologists look for this. And nobody really understands how it entirely works, but there are certain light elements that are involved. But with the Bouguer anomaly, where that's present, when you walk down into a river valley, such as the Ohio Valley, where the Mothman thing took place, or such as some of the areas of the Litchfield County in Connecticut, you walk down and you would expect the gravity would get a little heavier as you approach the center of the earth, but it doesn't. With the Bouguer anomalies, but you get a little lighter. Gravity lightens up somewhat. All right, and it's very weird, but it's measurable.
Okay.
And we found that in the weirdest cases we've dealt with, particularly the flap areas, the Bouguer anomaly is front and center. The strongest Bouguer anomaly in Connecticut is right smack under the Litchfield Triangle. All right.
Okay.
The second strongest is over on the other end of the state in the Pomfret, Putnam area, where I had my first case, 1970 to 72, where all these weird things are going on. You're hearing the lives of other people. Now, why would this have any relevance? Well, what did Einstein say about gravity? It bends space and time.
Okay.
Right.
So
now, whether it's enough to do that, whether we're all wet on this, I don't know. But we are looking into it because I think it's a distinct possibility, and it's attracted some attention anyway. So
let me ask you, because you've said you've been following this area for many years, have you seen any pattern of factors where there's an uptick of sightings? Like a cycle, or when we see these correlations, sure enough, something will happen. Have you found anything like that?
Yes. One of the factors that could be involved here, and started perhaps 10 years ago, was having to do with our galactic neighborhood. Okay, and everything's connected, as you know. It's not just an isolated planet with nothing going on.
Right.
But you have a flattening of the galactic plane that happens about every 600 million years. So it means, and astronomers have told me this, that energy, particularly electromagnetics, can go zipping back and forth across enormous distances and affect the planets. And not only the whole schmear is flattened out lately, including the solar system. You see maps of the planets, with the sun, and they're all lined up. Well, they're almost never like that, except kind of now they're all over the place, like an atom. So I think that the electromagnetics of the thing have really become more conducive to the flow of inter-world energies, if you will. I think that may be a factor. One of the things too that I think we have to consider, which may be a caveat here, is that the information flow is incredible today with the internet. Everybody knows everything as soon as it happens.
Yes.
And so there could be no more paranormal phenomena going on than usual, but everybody's hearing about it more. and everybody's got their cell phones and taking pictures of this.
Yeah.
I mean, we got an incredible UFO video. Well, it's May 19 now in the Pennsylvania Triangle, which Coast to Coast put on. And we sat on it for a year. We wanted to MUFON, and one of our gang is Mark D'Antonio from MUFON. He's their chief analyst for videos, and he said it was one of the 2 best UFO videos he'd ever seen. And so then we released it. But that area, Bigfoot, seen it myself, my own eyes. UFOs. We have neighborhood meetings down there where all these people get together. We've had to move them to restaurants because nobody's house is big enough. And they agreed to on-camera interviews. We're having another meeting by Zoom coming up in next month. And Bigfoot, UFO, generations of people with Bigfoot stories. We actually got 3 generations on camera with our great colleagues, Alexander Petikoff and Charles Credo. Alexander being a filmmaker and Chuck, the terrific interviewer. And this stuff is well known down there. So, I mean, this is your flap area. And again, Bouget anomaly is present there.
Do you think anything of the shifting of the poles, and like even they say that even that's why even the GPS are being thrown off? Do you think that has anything to do with it?
I think everything has everything to do with everything else anyway. The magnetic pole has been gradually shifting kind of southwest for as long as it's been measured anyway. As opposed to the actual North Pole, the magnetic pole is different. So when you have I mean, sooner or later, you're going to have your compass pointing toward the middle of Manitoba, or I think it's right now it's over the Northwest Territories. But that's change is normal for the planet. You know, whether it be climate or whether
like what you said it before, we never had GPS. You know, there was nobody realized that it was happening.
I don't know what I ever did without it.
Well, imagine that. You know, you had to remember how to get to places, or like the phone, you had to actually remember telephone numbers.
Forget that. Yeah.
Anyway. I think that's very interesting because very rarely do you hear those types of explanations as to the cause of any phenomena, whether you want to call it paranormal as in ghost or cryptid Bigfoot sightings or anything like that?
Well, I'll do you one better, Marlene.
Go ahead.
I think what we might be dealing with is a electromagnetic situation where worlds are coming together more than they used to. Falling back on my theology here, but there was a brilliant theologian from France, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who wrote a lot in the 1950s and before that, and came up with the idea of the Omega point. Now, some people in the church consider him a heretic, but I think he's a hero. The Omega point was the point at which everything would come together into one world or one unity with a capital U, and as he would put it in Christ in the theological terms. But theological terms are not. I mean, you can see even what shamans have told me and stuff. Things have been kind of coming to a pinnacle, and it may take another 1,000 years. But I think you may be having more paranormal phenomena, more intersect points, more overwashes, simply because the worlds and the world families, as we call, are getting closer together, and inhabitants are mixing, laws of physics are mixing, and I think it's good. I think it'd probably be exciting in the end, because what would you end up with? Again, falling back on the theology.
Well, I was going to ask you that. Do you really think that all these worlds are compatible?
Well, I think that, and I'm often asked this. I'm often blamed for not embracing other people's religious beliefs, right? Because they figure if you're in the seminary, you must have studied what I believe, right? It's not true. Most people don't know what their own religions teach. And I'm not saying anybody teaches this, but I think it's very possible that what is the theology of the creation? Okay.
Right.
God had infinite love that could not be contained and literally like exploded into the creation. Okay. Well, if you have infinite love, wouldn't you have an infinite creation? Not just one timeline or one universe or anything. I mean, see, it's one of maybe it's my canted logic.
You're absolutely right. It wouldn't have to be something finite. Yeah, it would
Yeah,
be.
and I think that this notion of this was well known to our remote ancestors. Was present even in ancient theologies. It's what's the first line of Ephesians? There's a reference to the worlds, plural, and through him God created the worlds. I studied Greek, so because I wanted to read this stuff in the original. The English translations are hideous, and the actual word is cosmos, which is Greek for worlds or universes. And that's the oldest documents we have in the Greek say they use the word cosmos. Throughout other scriptures of other religions, other traditions, there are references to multiple worlds, and it's very clear. I think that this is probably the best kept secret in human consciousness is the notion of these multiple worlds. So when you have worlds coming together, and in quantum mechanics, there's a principle that all possibilities do exist. If they all came together, you might have a perfect creation. All possibilities, everything balancing out in complete elegance. And I think that's something we can be aware of now. I think the spirituality we could strive for would be awareness of the unity. Because what do we do when things don't go our way? Well, the cat died, so I'm never going to believe in God anymore. Things like that. I mean, we're all tempted toward that, but there are many worlds where the cat never died, never will, or never was. So
well, and even if you think about it, even if it's not balance as we like to think of balance as in harmony, maybe not everything has to be absolutely mirrored for it to be harmonious. As long as it works. It's just that I want to include this world, this existence, this dimension, whatever you want to call it. We kind of been the king of the hills for so long. It's hard to think of.
Yeah, or we think we are.
Well, exactly.
But I was constantly running into people in psychiatric wards when I was doing pastor work who seemed to be far more aware of this unity than other people, and that very often that's why they were diagnosed schizophrenic. And some of them were living in terrible worlds and were undergoing great suffering. Others were in very beautiful worlds.
Right.
I don't know if I've ever told you this before, but there was one really weird day at the state hospital in Augsburg. I was there doing the pastoral visits, and there was the doctor brought me into him and said, "You got to meet this guy. I know you're interested in history." And this particular fellow was, and he wasn't, he also had physical illnesses too, as well as, he was diagnosed schizophrenic. And he actually, he heard jokes about people who believe they're Napoleon. This guy actually did believe he was Napoleon.
He was one of those.
We had the most fascinating conversation. He was talking about Waterloo, Borodino, as if he was actually there.
Okay.
It was incredible. And the look in his eyes was so knowing. But what ruined it at the end was I finally asked him, I said, how did you find out, or what is it that made you think that you really were Napoleon? And he looked at me very seriously and said, God told me. Well, in the next bed, there was a guy who'd been lying there like a lump the whole time, rolled over and said, I did not. So all right. I'm going back to school.
He's like, okay, this is my cue to end this conversation.
But the point being, there's a lot more to the universe than there appears to be.
I know, and that's but what I'm saying is, like, you mentioned something about people's reality being shaken up. There's a lot of people that their reality is like, let's not go there, because once this goes down, this belief system or this version of reality, then what else is there?
Yeah.
Is not what I thought. So I'm going to hold tight to the version I know, because I can function within it. So I can see people are resistant to. It's like, that's too much. Other dimensions, other worlds. It's like they want to stick with the known. As a matter of fact, they have enough trouble as it is with the known world.
That's true.
Much less, stuff like that. But anyway, it has been wonderful to speak to you, Paul. Let me ask you I'm going to have a link to your show in the credits of this show, but for the podcast listeners, what is the website or where they can go ahead and find out about your books and about your shows and everything?
Sure. Well, they can start at behindtheparanormal.com.
Yes, I see that right there. Yeah.
Behindtheparanormal.com, and that's where they can find out pretty much everything from there. And it's been such a pleasure to be with you again, Marlene. Thank you for the
Likewise.
invitation.
It has been great. And let me add, do you have any books, any projects in the works now?
Yeah, we're working on Behind the Paranormal 3, Uneasy Skies.
Okay.
That should be out the end of this year, beginning of next.
Perfect. Then I want to wish you the best of luck. And again, thank you so much for being a guest. And I hope to bring you back on. And once that book comes out, we can talk about that.
Very good.
Take care. Bye-bye. So, wow. I'm telling you, I love speaking to Paul. You don't understand. We had this conversation going on even before we were running it. It was like, okay, Marlene, you're doing the show before the show because he's fascinating, with the things that he talks about. And again, he's one of these guests that has years and years and years and years. And I'm going to say the paranormal in a very broad sense. Paranormal is a UFO. And as you can tell, his background in what he studied, it sounds almost like a lot of the things that he witnessed went against what he's being taught. In a way, it was like, okay, I'm being told this is the thing, but this is what I'm seeing or what I'm experiencing, and there's something here is not quite jiving. Which is probably what he was saying, he became one of those, like, anybody that's had small children who keep asking, but why? And but why? But why? Well, he was one of those probably in his classes, which is great because that's really, I think, how human beings, they develop. And when I say, I don't mean as in the individual, yes, but collectively, as we progress as humans, and there's one of my dogs having a moment. That's how we learn, because we have groups of scholars or whoever that ask those questions, but why? Especially when you have a certain dogma that doesn't coincide with the reality of things. And by this, a lot of people think, well, when people do that, are they trying to destroy? No, sometimes it's to make it better, to make teachings better. When it's explained to coincide with the reality of what even he talked about now. The reality that we have, let's say, in the last, 30 years, 25 years, with, phones and technology and internet. And like he was saying that, were all these things happening all along, but now that people are able to capture them because basically your phone is a camera and people are looking for it. And in some cases, it doesn't carry a stigma to be involved. Whereas before you were worried, like, man, people are going to look at me and go, oh, the crazy guy. Now it doesn't. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors in there that I truly believe he's right when he says there's a very good chance all these things were occurring. Whether it's some type of cycle or pattern all along. It's just that now we're actually aware and looking for it and recording it, et cetera, et cetera. And I had somebody that I promised I was going to bring this up in the show, that in a way it ties into a little bit about what Paul was talking about, parasites, or family curses, or families that have generations of hauntings, or some of us, they call them demons or parasites, whatever, or farmers, which, by the way, I think is a very apt description. And somebody, because we were coming into springtime, and even myself when I moved in here, because I've talked about it in other shows about where I sage my this place that I got, and it's brand new, by the way. But still, and I've talked about it. I'm not going to go through that now in this show, and a lot of people have the tradition, if they don't do it like normally, where they sage. And by this, I'm saying sage because some people will do it with holy water or with salt, whatever your religious beliefs is, where how they declutter and they cleanse and they get ready in the springtime. And I had somebody mention to me, like, where they had noticed this thing where after doing a saging, and I think they used also salt in the doorways and windowsills. They had, in some cases, certain friends and or certain family members that for some reason, one had either stopped coming to their house or even stopped talking to them. And they were like, what is up with this? Because I thought that this, saging and clearing and banishing of negative energies or entities, if that's the case of what you think, it just could be negative energies, and you're basically welcoming in love and light into your space around you. Why is that happening? And I said, well, guess what? When you do this, if that person or persons has a negative attachment, you're basically putting up you're not welcome sign. And this person might not be aware that they have an attachment. They might, more than likely, they might be totally unaware. They just can't understand, well, all of a sudden they don't really want to go to your house or want to be around you. Mostly, let's go for the fact of, let's say you did it where you live, where they don't want to come and see you. They don't want to come to your house, or they insist on, oh, well, let's meet someplace and have dinner. Or we're maybe a neighbor, we can go the neighbor route. All of a sudden doesn't want to come to see you anymore. And I mean, they were describing, and it was like, because when you do a cleansing or banishing, and basically you're putting up a barrier, anybody that's got negative energy, and let me make this distinction. It doesn't even necessarily have to be an entity or an attachment or a parasite, what Paul was talking about. It could be somebody's just carrying a lot of bad, negative vibes about them. And sometimes you might be totally unaware of it. It's what's going up in here, which translates down to here and then to here. And sometimes people, they appear something that you have no idea or no clue what's going on internally with them or behind closed doors. Number one, you might not know them that well, or they don't talk about it, whatever the case might be. But, and that's why I'm addressing this, because a lot of people said, well, I don't understand why after I did this, I've had even friends just drop off. People don't call me, or certain people, not everybody, certain people. I said, because when you banish negative energies and entities, you are putting up a barrier for them to come to your home. They're going to feel uncomfortable. They might not understand why. As a matter of fact, I want to say 99% of the time, people don't understand why. Okay. Or if they want to see you, it's like, oh, well, let's meet, let's go to dinner. And they were even describing, all of a sudden, like, this person doesn't call them anymore. Forget coming to their house, doesn't call them anymore. And that's why. Because more than likely there's some negative, whatever, ... that's hanging out with them and coming to the place where you saged and salted and banished negative. And you're only saying, I only allow light and love to come into this place. Guess what? Almost like, and I know I'm being here a little bit Hollywood here, like the vampire that can't cross the threshold unless invited. Well, this is not a question of per se of invitation, because obviously you extended an invitation to this person or persons. We're talking here where it's almost like you rescinded the do not welcome. I mean, by this, I'm sure that it's not like they're going to start hissing or, things is going to pop off of them if they come to your house, but they might even feel uncomfortable. Or like, all of a sudden they're like, yeah, and they want to leave, and you're like, what happened? What's going on? Why is this person all of a sudden feeling like they don't want to like be here? I thought they were, let's go down the route. They said that they were going to spend the day here, and now they're ready to leave as soon as basically they're here 5 minutes. And in some cases I've heard of, guests or family actually getting physically sick. And people just don't understand how did that, like they're like totally perplexed as to how that happened or why. That is why. People sometimes have negative, and by this, I'm telling you, I don't think you should stop doing it. Okay? You should not stop doing this, as far as if whatever your practice is, I don't think you should stop, because there's ways around it. But it makes you, I'm just saying that this makes you a little bit more aware of that. Again, what you want to call them, parasites or attachments or whatever. Sometimes they're more common than you believe, and sometimes it's just bad vibes. Nothing, not a spiritual being, but just negative stuff going on. So if you think you're banishing only something on a spiritual or energetic field, no, you're actually banishing people that carry those vibes as well. So anyway, guys, I hope you liked the show. I've got a lot of interesting guests coming, return and new ones. So I want to go again. Thank you so much for coming back every week and being here with me. And again, if you have any stories that you want to share with me, go ahead and send them to me at Marlene@MiamiGhostChronicles. If you have any guests that you would like me to bring on, or any subjects like this one that somebody said, I want you to talk about this, because I think this happens to other people. I said, okay, let's talk about it. Any topic, anything like that, please contact me. And again, go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com for links to the videos, to the podcast platforms where the show is released on. I also host 2 other podcast series, which is Nightshade Diaries and Supernatural Storytime, which is scary storytelling. They each have their own individual sites, and you can find us everywhere. You can find a podcast version if you have certain podcast platforms that you like to find us on. I'm there. And again, if you go to marlenepardo.com, I put on there anything having to do with my writing and the new books that are coming out. So again, guys, thank you so much. I really enjoy this time that we spent together. Take care.